Hi, welcome everybody. Yeah, so today's going to be a really good topic. It's definitely a challenge, but it's for technical ultimately. Um, so yeah, we'll just wait a second and then we'll get started and we'll talk about it a little bit. How's everybody doing? Feel free to talk in the chat. I don't know, what's your experience with riffs and agility? Do you have any exercises that you like? Hi, how's it going? Nice to see you. So yeah, as usual, we're going to break it down technically. I think part of the issue with all of this is it's a challenge to get a sense of exactly all the different components that are needed when we have agility. We'll talk about some like a framework basically that we can use. Um, but yeah, we'll just wait a second. Yeah, in general, riffs, right, as we think about it, it's generally more of a contemporary thing, but we can talk about it as a classification like ornamentation. So it's just our ability to add little details to our main melody. We'll talk about this in a second as well. Hi, welcome everybody. It's good to see more people showing up. Okay, well, let's get started, I guess. There's lots to talk about in this. So always first and foremost, I think in this case, actually, it's really nice if you want to follow along. I'm a little more in a tenor range, so it might be harder for higher voice singers, but if you're a lower voice singer and are wanting to try this with me, it might be really helpful. So first and foremost, when we think about agility, we have to stay light and we don't want to over sing. So I recommend like this is your way into agility is actually to think of a lighter sound. So take a second, sort of relax, because when we have these certain impulses and reflexes, it's going to actually slow down our mechanism. So a lot of what we do with our technique is about getting into this sort of state so that we're not likely to sort of flinch around what we're doing. So first and foremost, take a moment, stretch, roll your head and your neck. Maybe see where anything is a little, hello, welcome. Anything that's a little extra tight. Again, the idea here is we don't want to use a lot of impact with our voice. We want to actually stay very, very light and gentle. So first and foremost, there are three kind of main principles to agility. One is lightness, like I've just been discussing. The other thing is accuracy. And then I want to talk about a concept of separateness and how we use certain vocal techniques to create separate, distinct tones. Hi, my name's Abram. Welcome. Nice to meet you. So the first concept is we always want to think about our breath. When we think about our breath, what we want to do in this case is actually the best way into agility is to think about the rebound of your support. So when we support, we have this feeling of our belly and our back pushing out. And then, hi, welcome. Nice to see you again. Good familiar face. Um, so the concept here, nice to meet you. Yes, very, very good. Hi, there's so many people here today. This is really, really cool. I think riffing and runs and agility is kind of one of the really fun, rewarding aspects of singing in general. So it's a really, really fun thing to practice. And again, it's actually something that's very light. So we don't have to over sing when we're doing this. And if you're actually trying too hard, you're a lot of the times you're going to slow down your voice. So again, lightness, accuracy, and separateness. And we're going to talk about these three distinct concepts. First thing is, hi, welcome, Alex. So yeah, the first thing we want to think about is actually how we use our support to build up pressure. And then, hi, welcome, Faye. Yes. And then When we release our support, this is actually when we can do a lot of our agility is actually on the rebound of our sound. So I like to think of this sort of like a rubber band. When you stretch out, you create this resistance, and then as it comes back, that's when we do our riff or our run. And of course, we can go against this as well, but this is a really easy way into the experience of it. Um, so the thing that we want to do is some breath exercises to feel this. And actually, it's very similar to a lot of what we do already in our practice. We just want to be more aware of the rebound or release of our support. So first thing, just get yourself in a nice comfortable place. Start to slow down your breathing. And then we're going to start doing that pulsing style exercise. So we're going to go and feel that ability to actually let go when you pulse out, right? And you feel your belly and your back expand. So it's like that ability actually to rebound is really important when we do our riffs. A lot of times people are holding their support too much and then they can't let go of it and it smooths over their riff. So this is going to be kind of when the riff doesn't quite work as we'd planned. And of course, the thing to think about here with agility is it's a lot of target practice. So of course you're going to miss and you're going to make mistakes and stuff, and that's totally fine. You just have to do some repetition through the practice. So again, we're feeling this sensation of pushing out and then letting it release. The other good breathing exercise that you can add to this is seeing if you can actually flex this muscle a little faster. So it's almost kind of like a giggle. You're going to go like, see if you can actually pulse it rather quickly. And you'll find that actually the mechanism can be a little sluggish. Depends from day to day, of course, too. So I'll give this a shot. So we're kind of pulsing in, relaxing. This is very similar to all the things we do in our support style exercises. So of course, follow this program. This is a little more of an advanced style. So I'm going to kind of go a little faster too. So there might be more questions, of course, asked. But if you're feeling really, really lost, there's lots of other videos on support, other concepts here. So we're going to pulse. And then we're going to do the faster thing and go. See if you can just get that to move rather quickly. You'll see how this plays a role later. So when we talk about riffs and runs and agility, we have to kind of involve style a little bit as well. So I'm going to talk about this concept of scoops and falls and an exercise that helps you feel this. And you're going to see how this sensation of pulsing in and then a quick release or rebound is actually this kind of style, and then how we're going to add to this bit by bit. So basic kind of exercise. We're going to go 1, 2, 1. We're going to go hey, hey. You see, it's that ability actually to release to that lower note rather quickly. Hey. I scoop up into one note. Hey. And then fall back down to the other one. So you can just kind of move this around and be like, hey, hey. It's very similar to that feeling of and we're riding the rebound. So again, this seems very, very simple and particular, but we're going to see how we add to this sensation. The other thing is you can actually move it to like a third. Be like, hey, hey. So this is this sort of rubber band sensation idea, right? We're pulsing out into our higher note, and then we're rebounding rather quickly to the lower note. So we're not, hey, that's too much, right? That's not quite the sensation here. We want, hey. Yeah, so we can do a second, hey, or a third, hey. You can kind of move this around, right? So that's the whole point with all these exercises. Try them in different places. It feels a little different everywhere. So, hey, hey, right? Our ability to come on and off. And you see how quickly I'm slinging back. So this is the general sort of physical undercurrent of what we're going to be doing. The next concept that I kind of want to talk about is actually the separateness component. So, with separateness, this is sort of actually a stylistic thing that I think is lost a lot of the time when we're talking about agility. Is it's kind of like this concept like you're hitting all the targets rapidly and you can feel them all as very distinct, like da 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 da. It's almost like a kind of cube-like sort of sound. At each note feels separate. If they smooth together, it doesn't quite feel fast. It's almost like an illusion in some respects. So with this concept, we want to think about a couple things. We're going to start with our most basic kind of riff, which is like 3, 2, 1, right? Like that. So, yeah, easy kind of a thing. But what we're going to do is first we're going to try singing it very staccato. So like yeah, ha, ha, that's already a lot of complexity, right? We've got a different kind of pressure for each note. Yeah, ha, ha. You separate them. Yeah, ha, ha. So that's the staccato kind of concept. It's this pulsing with our breath. You should feel this like yeah, ha, ha. So that way we know each specific pitch. And this is going to get more complicated as we go, but we're building it slowly so we can feel the sensation. Um, so we already have this rubber band feeling of hey, yeah. You can try different syllables or vowels. Whoa. And then whoa, ho, ho. It's this middle note that often gets lost when we're trying to do a riff, right? It kind of smooths over. So think about one, the staccato concept of ha, ha, ha. So you know those detached spots. And then think about actually kind of scooping into the middle note. And this is where we're going to start to feel a little bit of a pulsing in our throat. So this is a style kind of concept. A lot of our technique, right, first is about finding release and control over our throat. In this concept, we're thinking about actually adding a little bit of a pulsing sensation, and you're going to feel it with your support as well. And it's going to help create distinction with the sound. So try it really slowly at first and bear with me because you'll see how this all fits together. So we're like, so, you're going to start to feel a little bit of motion in the throat. You can kind of see that. It's really, really subtle. And then, you try these kind of back together and then try to fit it into one sort of concept. So we're, ha, ha, and you start to get a little bit of this sort of pulsing, bouncing thing. And again, use repetition here. So it's light. Ha, ha. And you start to get this little separation. I think a lot of time that's actually what's happening with a lot of these singers. So we're going to try this in a couple places and feel that out until we get into a flow. As always, it just takes time. So, ha, here's our spot. 3, 2, 1. And then we're going to go, ha, ha, ha. Right, trying to find them all is very distinct. And then, ha, that feeling of kind of pushing out with our support and releasing. And then this pulsing thing, ha, ha, ha. And then you start to get this sort of feeling, right? Ha, and you'll start to get that separation. So this is all kind of the technical component that we're thinking about as we do all of the exercises that we're about to start. One really, really great one that I like is actually just going through this sort of sequence. And each one of these is one of these moments of doing this little 3-note riff. So we're like, ha, 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 ha. And the goal is each step, that's where we feel the pulse. So it's like, ha. And each one of them has this 3-note riff. Ha, 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 ha. So that's already pretty fast. So we can slow it down, right? Get the sensation. Maybe try the staccato. Ha, 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 ha. Hi, welcome. Ha, 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 ha. Right, that's already really, you want to make sure that you're actually really, really accurate with all of these pitches. I'm doing 5, 4, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 7, 1. So it's these groups of 3 notes at a time. Ha, 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 you can see we're adding all of these concepts. We have a pulsing of ha. It's kind of like this scooping concept. You'll actually feel that a little better when you think of it like a scoop. And then ha, that feeling of flicking back with our support. So you can see we're starting to build some momentum here. Again, this is how we get into the practice of agility. So I'm just really trying to show it like step by step, and then you're going to start to feel all of this really sort of light experience. I like to compare it to like being a runner or something like that. You think of agility and your ability to dodge. There's strength, your ability to actually push off the ground. Then you're actually able to change directions, and it's very light, right? So we're thinking of a light tone. We think about where we can kind of push off, where we can release, like that. So again, ha, 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 ha. Yeah, and we try this around in different places, like ha, 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 ha. So again, this concept of pulsing, thinking of ha, maybe the middle note, right, is what we tend to lose in all of these little 3-note patterns. So like ha, kind of pulse it a little bit with my neck. I know that, again, this is a little bit like breaking the rules, but we're talking about a particular kind of stylized concept. So we're going to pulse with our throat very, very lightly. And that's okay. It's actually fine with your technique as long as you're not really, really attacking with your throat. It's always lightness. So ha, 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 ha. So a little bit of that throat feeling. And then again, pulsing with our support. Ha. And now trying to combine these all together. So ha, 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 ha. You see how this is starting to actually sound more distinct? And we can kind of pick up our speed from here and try to link the whole thing together. So it can be like ha. Try to feel that out. Ha. You try this around, and this is a really, really great exercise to just sort of get the flavor of everything we're about to practice in more particular sort of ways. So ha. I kind of move it around. Ha. Ha. Yeah, you'll feel this little bouncy sort of feeling in your throat. You'll feel the pulsing of your support, and you're actually singing very, very light and gentle. So again, that's a really, really nice exercise to sort of get started with all of this. Now let's start talking about sort of just the different patterns that we come across and sort of how we can start to piece them together. Because the concept with agility a lot of the time is just to break it up into little pieces, like just what we talked about, these little 3-note patterns. But we're going to sort of talk about some specific things. So that what I did there was more of like a diatonic pattern. It's just with the basic scale. But a lot of times when we riff, really what most people are doing like 90% of the time is using a pentatonic pattern. And this is a simple term for actually reducing the number of notes in our typical scale, which is 7 notes. We do like, what are we just doing? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We take out 4 and 7. And these 2 notes are really functional, and they create a specific kind of sound, and they sometimes clash with certain chords. So when we take those out, it makes actually a pattern that's really, really easy to fit inside a lot of different chords. And so it makes it really, really versatile. And so that's why pentatonic patterns are really great to learn for like guitar, for pretty much anything. And so when we're singing, we're going to be using this pattern a little bit, but we're going to use the model of what I was just talking about. This sort of like 5, 4, 3, 4, 3, 2, da, 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 da. It's got a sequence of the same pattern kind of going down. But now we're going to do it a little bit like a pentatonic thing. And this is to talk about a specific kind of riff that we hear a lot, but it's kind of lost sometimes because it happens so quickly, which is an end note riff. And this is usually like a note yeah, yeah. Like you hit the note, yeah, and it falls down 2 notes. Now I'm gonna go through the pentatonic pattern. So it's yeah, yeah, yeah. So these are 3 very, very common patterns that you'll hear in a lot of different music. Um, yeah, typically it's just based off of my schedule. Hi, welcome. But I've been trying to do them every Wednesday. Sometimes I have to switch it just based on certain schedule things, but try to do it in the middle of the week. Um, so here we are now going through more of a pentatonic pattern. And again, go through some of the other work with scales and things like that. If this is feeling like a little too advanced and too fast, and let's explain because we've got a lot of things to cover. So I'm doing these 3 different patterns. One of them we just practiced, which was this, yeah, yeah. And then we have, yeah, yeah. So those 3 things you'll hear a lot. We're gonna try to turn it into this whole sort of practice. So first we wanna try it maybe with the staccato thing to make sure and work against, that sort of smoothing thing that happens. It smooths over and gets a little too legato. It's very natural, especially if you're like a classical trained singer. This is gonna feel sort of counterintuitive. So it takes a sec to work into the flow. So this is the goal. We think about the staccato thing. Yeah, ha, 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 ha. And we feel it like that. Yeah, ha, 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 ha. And you really want to make sure that you're hitting each specific note. Then we think of this sort of rubber band concept of yeah, yeah. So I'm leaning into the first note and rebounding on the other ones. Yeah, 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 yeah. And you see, actually, that helps it spring back with the right sort of momentum. And then we think of that pulsing thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that helps to get a little bit of extra distinction. You'll see as we start to kind of move this around how that gets stronger and stronger. So again, yeah, 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 yeah. Very, very light. So we can try this in different places and be like, yeah, 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 yeah. So these are 3 patterns that we're going to start to hear a lot, and we can actually use them and piece them together with other things that we see. Um, so that's one concept. These are these end note sort of riffs, is what I like to call them, because you'll typically hear them a lot at the ends of a phrase. There's lots of examples of this, especially check like R&B music, pop, any sort of generally contemporary genre, even musical theater. You're going to see more of this. Um, and typically it's going to be in this sort of pentatonic pattern. And then the other kind that we're going to see a lot is called a turnaround. This is where we hit a note, then we go up, and then we actually go through one of these 3-note sort of end riffs. And this is why I'm starting to kind of stack it in this way, so you can actually sort of see a framework to work with. And then when you start to see the riffs more, you're able to actually utilize them better. So you see them as sort of like a bundle or a packet. Um, so the turnaround is this concept. So I'm like, let's say I'm going 2, 3, 2, 1, like, yeah. So I'm starting on one note, and then, yeah. That was that little 3-note riff that we did. This very simple one, right? 3, 2, 1. It happens all the time. It's funny sometimes you're like, oh, what was that riff? It was so good. And you realize it was just 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1, a really, really basic scale pattern. But starting with 2, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, that happens all the time. We could also do it off of 3 and 4. This isn't the pentatonic scale, but again, we can do riffs with regular scale and with the pentatonic. So, yeah, yeah. We start to add to it. So again, this is the kind of most basic turnaround is the 2, 3, 2, 1. Yeah. We can actually use this sort of like rubber band analogy to think about this as, yeah, we build pressure, belly in our back. Yeah. We kind of just push into it and then relax again. So that's that concept. Yeah. You can use this as an exercise and move it around and just be like, whatever it is, right? Yeah, was thinking kind of light, yeah. And then we think of a little bit of that pulsing sensation. So again, you can do all of the things I talked about, thinking staccato, and then thinking about the sort of rubber band concept, and a little bit of the scoop and sort of pulsing with our throat. Um, so these are like kind of the components of a larger riff, and this is where it starts to get really fun. Hi, welcome. I'm so glad you're excited. This is really really fun. And again, the practice that I do a lot of the time is to not be too serious about riffs, to kind of be silly about it like this. To practice singing along to songs on the radio and just see if you can add lots of riffs here and there. And then of course later we'll talk about like picking really really nicely placed riffs and when it can be kind of distracting if you're doing too much. But first just like enjoy the feeling. It's kind of nice. You don't have to oversing. So again, we had our basic three note end riffs, which is this like yeah, 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 yeah. That's using the pentatonic thing. And then this turnaround thing that's like yeah, yeah. It starts one spot and moves up and then comes back down again. Um, let's talk about making larger riffs. So for example, like say we want to do a 5 note riff and use the pentatonic scale. I'm going to do it a little higher. 3, 2, 1. And then I'm going to think of this one as 1, 6, 5. These three sort of 3 note spots are sort of combined together, right? We have 3, 2, 1, 1, 6, 5. Yeah, 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 yeah. And we try to sort of think of it as this pulsing with each of these 3 note groups, like yeah, yeah. And then you sort of pull back and you think of that pulsing and sort of staccato sensation with your belly and your back, and also with your throat. So yeah, 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 yeah. Um, yes, it is very, very good. That's the whole point of this is like it's really a practice, and like some days it might feel like a little harder to do based on your voice and where it's what's happening. But you can always use this practice to sort of get into the right sensation. So we have 3, 2, 1, 1, 6, 5, and then you can start to try and link it together. Be like, yeah, yeah, and you start to hear it. Oh, that's the kind of thing that we hear a lot in the music, right? Is yeah, yeah, yeah. And you try to get that little pulse. Yeah, that's the classic sort of 3, 2, 1, 6, 5. You'll often hear also the reverse or flip side of that, which is 6, 5, 3, 2, 1. So yeah, yeah. So I have 6, 5, yeah, yeah. Again, very, very light technique that I'm trying here. So yeah, a little bit of that pulse. And I think it's good to sort of pause here. Sort of my strategy always with a lot of these things is to start with a slightly more exaggerated sound, which may be a little silly and it feels a little weird, like when you're like really trying to pulse it and you're like, okay, I'm doing like the real like poppy thing and like moving my head up and down. Um, but the goal here is actually just to so we get the sensation and control over the muscles in the right way. And then we reduce it down and it becomes more and more subtle and refined. It sort of works into a smooth kind of combination of different kinds of coordination at the same time. So we're sort of coaxing our muscle memory into the right place. That's really the trick here. That's why sometimes it's like, oh, these sounds are weird and they sound silly, but that's actually part of how we help the body find the right sort of placement. And then we can kind of refine it from there. And when things don't quite work in the right way, we can go back and we can use that strategy to fix it rather than trying to just do it a million times or things like that. There's definitely repetition involved with this because it's target practice. You can tell I'm doing it over and over again to get more and more of a sensation and separation. So these two main kind of 6 note or sort of 5 note riffs are the 6, 5, 3, 2, 1. So we've got that one. And then we've got 3, 2, 1, 6, 5. It's the same thing, but all flipped around on the other side. Um, yeah, singing is, as I always say, is a wellness activity, and target practice like this can be really, really silly and fun. And I think imitation is part of it. So you think about like all your favorite celebrities, kind of like fooling around with kind of moving through all the different notes. This is something that you can add to a lot of songs, and we're going to talk about how you can like piece this together into certain things. And the more you get used to the certain sensations, the more you can repeat the pattern. And the really cool thing with music in general, with all of this, is that uh, the patterns are all repeating all the time. So this thing that we're learning works for any key as long as you're singing with the one as your central note of the key, right? Like if it's the key of F, right? F is going to be 1, 3, 2, 1, 6, 5. You know, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 1, 6, 5. So this pentatonic scale is what people get comfortable with. So I recommend if you're trying to get agility for a particular song, figure out what key it is and then learn the pentatonic scale there, and then do these kinds of exercises where we're playing around with it, right? Yeah, 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 right, and then yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just doing it in these little 3-note bundles, right? And then eventually, yeah, whoa. And you can do like different vowel combinations. That's sort of a nice thing to play around with if you feel like you're getting a little stuck. Try like, oh, like a nice or yeah, whoa. And I'm trying to get again a little bit of a kind of a drag against my throat. Uh, Sort of an analogy that I forgot to mention that I like to sort of talk about with this and visualization is it's like you're running your fingers down the tines of a comb, and each one sort of pulls and has a little tension and then slips past. And so that's sort of like the sound that we hear a lot with our riffs, that we really, really like. At least that's sort of what I noticed with a lot of contemporary sounds. And it's paired up a little bit with this pulsing sensation in our support at the same time. So that's a really, really complex sort of feeling. And it's very subtle and very light. And so again, people try to overdo it. And the trick is to be very, very light like this. Um, so that's that sort of separateness concept. The accuracy, of course, bringing back to our main framework. So I'm talking about all these numbers. I'm keeping track of where they are, thinking about the scale that I'm singing in and what key my song is in. So these are all slightly more complicated concepts. And if you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, look it up. We also have resources that try to explain this a little more in depth with intonation and scale degrees and getting really comfortable with the major scale. And in this case, the pentatonic scale. So these are our 5-note riffs. Now, think about it. We can add some of these turnarounds and things like that. We can talk about sort of moving around sort of 1 and doing like a sort of 2, 3, 2, 1, 6, 5, and then coming back to 1 again. And this happens all the time. So like it might be like this, like yeah, yeah. It comes right back up. So again, it's yeah, it's one part of it. Yeah, and I come back. So yeah, yeah. And I try to get a little bit of that sort of pulsing sensation. Um, yeah. So yeah, that's sort of the concept here, right? Is we're sort of attaching pieces together, and you might start to notice that you can reverse engineer riffs that you're hearing, and you're like, oh, that's a turnaround. There's a little 3 end note riff that starts to add a few extra notes too. There's a 5-note riff that's really obvious in the pentatonic scale, and then all of a sudden your mind's gonna be blown because you're gonna realize it's like everyone's doing the same thing over and over again, in slightly different ways with slight different sort of variations of scoops and falls, and that creates everything that we have. Now, the next question is sort of how we add this into stuff. So again, you have to start to think about where the riffs start. We have like when we did this turnaround, it's 2, 3, 2, 1. It's always on the 2 actually. Yeah. There's other options for this, of course, but I'm just using these as sort of our base, kind of most easiest to attach to concepts. And then from there, you can actually start to find more variations. So always with music, think about what's most common. So yeah, that's that turnaround. 2, 3, 2, 1. You might go like 5, 3, 2, 3, 2, 1. Yeah. Um, yeah. So this is the question actually, is I would say that it's good to try to feel your ability to actually come on and off of your support. And when in general, when I'm doing the riffs, sometimes, yeah, I'll lean into it and sort of test that out. But in general, a lot of times singing too loud, you might actually slow it down. So that's sort of part of this agility thing is to find that lightness. Um, So, yeah. And then I'm actually going to be able to go faster and faster when I have all of this release. So some of this is the concept of smooth tone, mixing, some of these other things that we talk about that I've done in some of the other classes a few weeks ago. So check them out because this will really help when we do something more advanced like this. So I'm thinking a very light kind of falsetto mix. Like, yeah. So you can see, like, if I had a melody like that, when I get to the two, I could do a turnaround like that. We could do some of these things like I did with the exercise where it goes like 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 6, da, da, da. You'll hear that a lot of the time as well. So this is the idea: is we're attaching these concepts. We've got the 3-note end note riffs, and then we have the turnarounds, and we have scoops and falls, and then we have longer sort of 5-note riffs, and they're often pentatonic. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just going down the scale, but a lot of times you're going to hear pentatonic because it works better. So if you're practicing riffing the things, see if you try the pentatonic when you're like going along with the radio, things like that. Um, so one song that I really like to just sort of use as an example to help with this, and it's public domain kind of thing, is Amazing Grace because it fits well with a pentatonic kind of a sound. So we're going to try this out and we're going to talk about it. And I'm curious if you can hear what riffs I'm adding in and if you can identify what they were based on what we just sort of practiced. And that's sort of the game that I want people to realize. So say I'm like, that's sort of like an upward riff. We'll talk about these later. It's a little harder, but it's different. It's going through pentatonic. So, amazing grace. So there's sing grace. We can do that thing. So, amazing grace. And then how. I did a little 5-note riff, right? How with a turnaround. How sweet the sound. So, amazing grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I could do a little thing like that. Me. Going through a little thing and trying to keep it really separate. And then I once was lost. Doing little turnarounds. But now am found. Was blind, but now I see. And again, I'm singing very, very light right now. And the feeling is just to get a sense of how I can affect my voice and kind of move it up and down and sort of change all of these things. So I really recommend actually try to do it very, very light like this. Yeah. So this is sort of funny, right? I'm just sort of playing around with lots of different options. And sometimes you'll totally go into a very, very silly place and be like, okay, those riffs do not work right there. Or these are way too many riffs. Like I may not do all of those kinds of things when I'm like singing for a particular situation where it might seem like too showy or whatever it is. But again, I'm doing this sort of pattern. Amazing grace. How sweet. I did a little pentatonic. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch. Kind of scooping into things, right? A wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. You can kind of keep adding different things where you feel them. And then what I start to do is try to feel like, okay, can I add more support in certain places and keep the riff kind of still there? So it's your ability to come on and off of things. Amazing grace. A little pulse there, maybe. Zing, zing, in grace. So this is how I work through things, right? I'm like, amazing grace. How sweet the sound. Sometimes I'm making sure that I have the feeling of like connecting into my support, getting that sort of springiness and coming back. And so I'll repeat back and forth, and think about, oh, it was maybe a little too smooth, and I need to add a little extra pulsing, and so I might slow it down. And think about all of these things, and so sort of inside my head, I'm also thinking like the scale degrees of this melody, and where I can start to do some of these sort of larger 5 note riffs, right? So I was thinking on how I could do that kind of there, a little bit of a turnaround, and then like me, and then I went up to a note so I can la, so I can get up to that 6, and then I could come back down. So when you get really familiar with the melody, you'll actually start to feel these spots, right, where you're building up and you're like, oh, I can just jump down the scale and kind of move around. And again, I just recommend be very, very silly with this kind of stuff. It's just, you can kind of use your hands a little bit. Like I do that sometimes where I'm just sort of trying to guide the targets. And again, the 3 main principles are light, accurate, and separate. So we want to think of this very light kind of sound because that's going to help me with my agility. And then I want to think about the scale degrees, which takes a little bit of understanding these numbers, things like that. And then this concept of pulsing with the throat and a little bit with our support as we come back down through our rebound of our sound. Um, Eventually, you can learn to kind of do riffs kind of moving upwards, but I recommend if you're just getting used to doing all of this kind of stuff, start with it higher and then dropping down into these things, right? So we've got these major sort of concepts. Um, but yeah, so anyways, this is sort of the thing. You'll start to hear them all over the place and be like, "Oh, that's that kind of riff." And then I just sort of mess around with it, and you can go up into head voice and like sometimes I'm just like, "Ooh, yeah, yeah, ooh." And I'm just sort of like playing around with that same sort of thing. Feeling again for, can I keep it separate? Yeah, and keep a little bit of a pulse. Do I know where I am with the scale? And can I feel a little bit of this rebound with my support? Like, yeah, ooh, that kind of too smooth, right? Ooh. So then I was like, oh, maybe I can do a little more, get a little more sort of pulsing. If you go too much, then it maybe sounds like a little weird as well. So again, it's this sort of balancing act that singers are doing when they're trying to figure out just the right kind of thing with a song, is sort of feeling out all of these sort of variables. So um, that's the concept. And again, Amazing Grace is a really great one to practice with. It fits well with like a pentatonic. Um, yeah, I know. Sorry, it's sort of the timing thing can be hard for for the global audience, but that's sort of the fun thing, is actually it can be very, very light when you're practicing it, and then you just practice sort of adding in more and more energy. Sometimes when we over support and our muscles get tight, it starts to smooth it over a little bit. And so again, we want to try and sort of find that sweet spot as we're practicing it. And slow things down, right? Like you can always, like, let's say we're doing Amazing Grace, and I might first like think about it like this, like Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch. This is just the basic melody, right? Like me, I once was lost, but now am found. I'm just trying to get a sense of, okay, where is everything? And then amazing, zing. Maybe trying to see if I can get a little pulse. Amazing grace, how sweet. Try to see if I can drop down into these things. How sweet the sound. Feel those sort of turnarounds. The sound, the sound that saved a wretch like me. And see if I can kind of maybe get it a little harder and sort of pulse against it a little more. I once was lost, but now am found. was blind, but now I see. And you kind of sort of play around with your dynamics and feel if you can get these to kind of move faster and faster. Um, Again, so that's sort of the main practice, right? Is we want to think about sort of breaking things into smaller chunks, thinking about pulsing, lightness, and then some of our scale degrees and using staccatos to sort of get it um, sort of very, very specific where our targets are. Um, yeah, exactly. This is sort of exactly what we're talking about is the lighter voice is a great place to practice all of this stuff. And so even in head voice, if that's something that's familiar with you, it's going to be a little easier. Chest voice in general, our registers are more of a metaphor, but chest voice tends to be more about stability and strength and leaning into things. And when we're doing this sort of agility thing, like we do need sort of that ability to push off and create that resistance. That's sort of like the rubber band concept. But if we're singing really heavy in our chest voice, it's actually going to make our voice kind of more stuck in that specific position. And so, actually, practicing riffs is a great way to sort of find flexibility when you're thinking about agility. So, if you're a heavy singer, this is a great thing to actually practice to sort of balance out your tone, is to make sure that you can come to a lighter place. So there's certain moments in songs where you want to really lean into it, and that's totally great. Like I love sort of singing in very, very heavy, but then we have to be able to come back off of it. And this is sort of where, like, if we have lots of tension in our voice, it's going to be hard actually to sort of find agility again, and that sort of lightness, because the muscles are super amped up, and that can be a trick, a challenge that we have as we try to go back and forth between like sustain, which is essentially kind of the opposite sensation from ornamentation, and agility is sustain. And then, agility is your ability to change directions and move through some rapid targets rather quickly. Um, so, anyways, you're going to hear these little patterns all over the place. That's these sort of 5 note riffs are very, very common. There's some songs that are kind of particularly designed around that. And then sometimes you'll hear them just as like the interlude or like vocalise behind something. Like, they're singing the melody, and then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, oh, and you just hear that sort of like drift away, and then they go back into the song, oh, and they do a little bit of a riff here and there. Again, you want to lean into them, but actually the trick is to pull back and to think a little bit lighter, like, oh, make sure I know all the spots, oh, and then a little, oh, 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 yeah. And actually, this is something to point out is a stylistic thing, and how sort of style all kind of works together as a physical concept is the scooping thing and the voice cracking a little bit are all sort of part of this kind of throat tension that we can add in once we have control over our voice. So again, the practice I do a lot with people is actually relaxing and trying to make sure that we can do everything without engaging in the throat, keeping this really, really loose. And that's so that we can turn it off. And then that ability actually allows us to turn it back on and control it a little more. So we when we do this and we add throat tension, it might make us crack. It might it is, we're essentially squeezing a little bit. It's sort of a concept in getting into grit singing and doing more heavy metal kinds of things, is just having just the right amount of tension. It's not for beginners. It's sort of a more advanced technique because you're riding the board to the edge, so to speak, right? And so this is why I always sort of tell people, get in the practice, work your voice from the middle, and get really comfortable with like healthy middle singing. And then you can start to practice kind of adding in extra stylized kinds of things. So again, I'm doing this in kind of a higher range, like, you know, like, oh, yeah. But that's because I'm comfortable up in this sort of range without pressing really hard. Um, yeah. So, um, yeah. So this is again, this is the concept is like think more mixy. Yeah. And start from there. And if you feel like it's not quite working, slowly add in a little more support. See if you, yeah, oh, but never to the point where you're pressing where the muscles are locking. Um, so this is always this game is like think very, very light. The very, very light sort of mixy thing. Um, and you'll start to notice these riffs all over the place, right? Again, like, yeah, oh, oh, So I'm doing the same kind of riff, but I'm just sort of changing maybe how I like scoop into it, or where it starts, or how quickly, or if I stop on a single specific note. And sometimes it makes it sound like a totally different riff, actually. And that's sort of the weird thing with music is like I've come across songs where I'm like, oh, that riff's super cool. And then I go back and I figure out what are the notes in the scale. And I'm like, oh, it's just 3 2 1. But they stopped a little bit on two for a second and then like bent down to one or whatever like that. And you can get that specific when you're trying to figure out how to sort of do a specific riff that you want to imitate exactly. Really try to dissect it a little bit like that, break it into pieces, and then do this sort of method, right? Which is think staccato, then think about where are the nodes, where do you sort of push in these sort of 3 note patterns so you can get a little bit of springiness. Um, and then we think about getting just a little bit of a pulse with our throat, a little bit of tension that pulls and slips from one note to the next. I think that's sort of the missing piece sometimes. And again, it can be very hard if you're singing lots of classical music to come to this sort of lighter, sort of riffy, kind of mixy place. Um, and again, the strategy sometimes too is just to sing along to the radio and try singing in a pentatonic pattern. Like first work it out, get in your muscle memory a little bit, and then see what happens, And again, sometimes, like even today, like doing some of this in front of people, like sometimes they smooth over and you work through a practice to try and figure out how to get it to be a little more tight. And the magic of sort of singing a song is you get this into your muscle memory, you work it into the song, and it starts to become a very, very automatic thing. But there's a lot of subtlety to what that experience is when you really try to break it down. And that's what I hope to show people with this kind of stuff is just how do we break down the sensation so that we can actually teach it and work with it. And imitation is really powerful too. So like just trying to sing along and imitate what people are doing is it definitely helps with our muscle memory. But you can actually break it down into feelings so that you can just get a better sense of how to actually make it work. So yeah, any questions? We're getting to the end here. So but yeah, anyways, simple songs that are in a slightly more pentatonic sort of thing, like blues and these kinds of things are going to lend themselves more to riffing. Pretty much all pop music as well. And you maybe find a little less in certain folk situations, but even in country, that there's definitely lots of riffing that happens all over the place. And just identify, is it 3 notes? Is it 5 notes? Is it something crazier where there's like 7 or 10? I mean, you can keep going. Ultimately, if you went really high in your range, you could drop down through a whole scale ultimately and kind of pulse all of them. And that could be a really fun practice as well, but it's maybe a little too advanced for where we're at with everything here. But that could be a really fun topic at some point, is to get even into more advanced and sort of longer winded riffs. A lot of the times it's sort of coming in and out of the melody at the same time. So yeah, hopefully that gets people in sort of the right place to practice. And I'm always curious what other people's sort of experience or sensation of singing riffs is like. And that's part of how we figure all of this out, is like, what does it feel like when it's working? What does it feel like when it kind of smooths together and gets too legato, right? There's the musical term where it's actually too smooth. So again, sometimes we want a smooth tone and then we want it to be really short and choppy. And that makes for a really nice contrast, which happens a lot in a lot of contemporary music. So just to review the 3 concepts: practice in a light way. Think about accuracy. Like I was using my piano. There's lots of resources to sort of map it up and watch where your pitch is, right? Like Singing Carrots or some of these things like that, where you can actually see where your voice is landing. You can also do it by sort of making sense of the numbers and thinking about the scale. And so we have lots of practice for that as well. And eventually it becomes like a feeling sensation. Yeah, yes, and yeah, so this is sort of the whole point, is like if you sing really heavy, it can be harder to do riffs. And so it depends on sort of where your voice is at. And you want to do this kind of practice actually as a way to balance out your voice. Part of it is working through some of the tension things that can happen when we sing heavy. Our tongue gets really locked in place, or our jaw. And when these things start to get really tight, it kind of blocks our ability to do this sort of delicate thing actually, right? Which was that little pulsing that can kind of come when we're sort of rebounding through our riff. So that's sort of the idea, is like if you've been finding that your voice is kind of moving in a more sort of chunky way. Practice light falsetto mix. Try some songs that are like that. So again, we're going less into a forward belt and more of like a that sort of lighter place. Yeah. Oh, oh. You can see that I can start to add into it and then let it kind of fall back and forth and stuff like that. You can see how you could do this for like lots of lots of time, and don't annoy your neighbors and your family members too much, but I kind of love doing that actually. Uh yeah. See, anyway, the point is actually that sort of lightness actually can help you work through it. And I sing like classical stuff and really like to lay into the voice. But when I've been doing a lot of that, it's really hard for me to pull back into a nice sort of riffy place. So again, it works with the kind of song that works with that kind of style. And that's a really big and important sort of point is like, we're talking about contemporary agility. I have some exercises for ornamentation for classical music and stuff. It's kind of similar, to be honest. It's just the patterns are a little different, so you have to get used to sort of the, certain kinds of time periods had certain kinds of ways that they ornamented things, and that actually gets to be really fun if you go like that kind of stuff and go into that. But this is the most common stuff that you're gonna see, and that's why we want to kind of focus on this first, definitely. Um, yeah, exactly. You don't have to blow your neighbors away, and that's sort of the temptation, right? Is like this happens in music a lot. Um, we when we're going fast, we want to get louder. And so we have to kind of go against that impulse because in order to go fast, we actually have to think lighter and more agile. It doesn't mean that we don't have energy, right? And that's why I was kind of calibrating back and forth and just hopefully showing that a little bit. Again, it's a little messy, the practice sometimes. Like you're not always going to land these riffs, and sometimes they smooth over and it sounds kind of ridiculous. That's just how we work through it. But generally, the intuition is actually to pull back a little bit for the most part. Uh, yeah, and then ultimately the question is to run or not to run. Like, do you add a riff or do you not? Like sometimes you don't have to. Some songs like it kind of needs it, which is an interesting thing that you intuitively start to learn. But there's nothing worse than someone way over riffing when it's getting in the way of the emotional sort of aspects of the song. So sometimes you can use a riff to actually help kind of add to the emotion, and it just sort of gives it a different flavor, especially when there's lots of repetition in the melody. And you just have to sort of play this by ear a little bit. Sometimes it's too much, and sometimes you can't fit them in. So often that's why you see them a lot in sort of like the vocally sort of sections where you can kind of free sing for a bit. It's a great way to practice improvising. That's pretty much what we're doing right here, right? When you're adding ornamentations, you're adding your own style and flavor to the song. And there's a huge tradition of that in even in classical music. That was the whole thing really was like in early music. It's like what sort of extra stuff are you going to add, and how does that make it sort of unique? And that's what people would come to see. And it's really interesting that you see that now too in pop music. It's pretty much the same thing. So I just always get a kick out of that when you see that actually the styles aren't that far off. It's just they had a different sort of music and like different instruments, and sort of the whole general style is different, so the ornamentation sounds a little different. Usually kind of matched more off of like the orchestral sounds and things. So yeah. Yeah, exactly. So this is the thing is like sometimes when we're going too fast, um, that's when you wanna you're missing the targets. That's when you wanna slow down and do this sort of like staccato thing and just be really light and just make sure that you know where they are. And then if it's still getting really hard to do, then try to really figure out where the numbers are. And again, the cool thing with the pentatonic is you only have to know 5 notes. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. And so it skips 4 and 7. And when you know all of those zones in a song, uh, that's only 5 spots that you have to kind of memorize where you feel them with a particular song. Then you're going to have that ability to sort of riff and jump around, thinking about these sort of groups. Um, Yeah, exactly. I know, and people are kinda like, "Oh, you're like, that person's sort of singing to themselves." That happens to me all the time. I'll just, like, start riffing, and I'll be, like, grocery shopping or something, and then, like, turn the corner and be like, sorry," just riffing out a little bit to the music. Um, why not? Yeah, definitely. That's sort of the funny added benefit of this is you might look a little insane as you practice it, but do it while you're driving, things like that. Um, it can be pretty fun. And part of the experience is like when you go for a note and you think it's part of the riff, and then you realize that you're like don't know where you are and you completely get lost. That's also a learning experience with all of this. And again, the saving grace of it is that the pattern is very repetitive and it's always the same pattern, just in different places. And so the more used to that you get, the more you're able to just add riffs to anything and everything. And it starts to happen kind of intuitively. Like I know a lot of my singing colleagues and friends, it's just sort of a feeling based thing actually. You hit the note, you lean into it, and you feel the sensation of being able to do a turnaround or something like that. That's when you know you've really gotten into your muscle memory better. Um, yeah, let's see if we got, yeah, so again, it just depends on the style of music. So this is again, I don't wanna say that, like, over riffing is bad. There's certain styles of music where it's really nice to kind of keep adding and layering in riffs. I just think in certain situations, like, it can sometimes detract, and so you always wanna be, intentional about where you're adding them, and oftentimes it's, like, your ability to, like, make sure it's not the same riff over and over again and sort of vary them up. So that's why it's nice to have some different options. Um, Definitely like R&B music is gonna have more riffing, in general. Pop music will have more riffing too, but sometimes maybe a little less. And like as you go more towards like folk and country, like sometimes too much riffing and you're starting to kind of take it out of the style, which is supposed to be a little more laid back and a little more just sort of about the lyrics and simple melodies. So you really have to just play it by ear, and that's part of being an artist is making those choices and deciding how you want to add to your song. So that's always the cool thing about this is it's just what you can add and how you can kind of put a flavor into it. And sometimes you realize you're doing it without actually noticing what you're doing, and this can be really helpful. So you can start to see like, oh, I am adding scoops there, or those, what am I doing right there? Oh yeah, it's a 3 note riff or turnaround. So yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes, I mean, I've heard some versions of that where it kind of works, but yeah, sometimes it sounds off. This is why we have to practice these things. You try out the riffs and you realize, when I did that riff like that, it sort of had the wrong effect in the music. Sometimes we use riffs to sort of amp things up and move smooth through transitions, but sometimes it just gets away in the way of the main melody. And so you just have to know when you want to sort of support into your sound and lean into a word, and when you might want to relax it. And I'll just leave with this. Typically, a lot of riffs happen towards the ends of the phrases. Um, you can kind of tuck them into the middle here and there, definitely, but you'll notice them a lot more at the very ends of things as our support's relaxing or coming off of our voice a little more. Um, yeah, so practicing accuracy, right? And we'll leave with this concept. Use staccato, right? Think like short and detached. Um, Yeah, piano. You can use like there's these online sort of pitch accuracy things where like as you sing, it'll show you where your voice is, and it'll show you on like a keyboard, kind of like almost like a ultimate guitar kind of a thing, or Guitar Hero kind of a thing, where it's like coming down where the note is. So you can practice that way using a teacher. And again, sort of the thing is be patient with it. It's hard at first to get the hang of it, but it's all very repetitive. So even just a few lessons with someone who understands the pentatonic scale and can teach that to you and get you more comfortable with it is going to really really help. And then you can actually just like rinse repeat and try that with a lot of different things. Uh, no, no worries. Again, this is why we always repetition with this stuff is really important. It's why I have a practice, because you have to sort of feel these things out and explore them and see if you notice them in the music that you're listening to. So, all right, everybody, have a good night, and you're very, very welcome. And I look forward to next time. All right, take care, everybody.